Jan, get down here now! Jerry's voice bellowed from the basement, cutting through the afternoon silence like a blade. The urgency in his tone made her coffee mug tremble in her hands. She set it down carefully, her heart already beginning to race. In 32 years of marriage, she'd never heard that particular edge in his voice. Something was wrong, terribly wrong. The wooden steps creaked under her feet as she descended into their basement, the harsh glare of the single bulb making her squint. Jerry stood in the far corner, surrounded by half-opened boxes and scattered papers from their recent spring cleaning project. In his hands, he clutched a small book with a faded pink cover. "That better not be my diary," she said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to her own ears. She hadn't thought about those old journals in years, had honestly forgotten most of them existed. Jerry turned slowly to face her, and the expression on his face made her blood freeze. It wasn't just anger. It was disgust, mixed with complete disbelief. "Yeah, Jan," he said in a voice so low it made her skin crawl. "Your diary, the same one where you apparently kept some pretty detailed records." She swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "Jerry, come on. You know I used to write all sorts of silly nonsense when I was young. It's probably nothing important." She reached out, hoping he'd just hand it over, but instead he gripped it tighter. His knuckles were white. "I don't think it's nothing," he said, his nostrils flaring. "Because what I just read, my God, Jan, you've destroyed me." Her heartbeat quickened, pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. "What do you mean?" Jerry opened the diary, flipping to a page that had been dog-eared with obvious purpose. In a voice shaking with barely controlled rage, he began to read, "I wish Jerry would agree to marry me sooner, but I'm so tired of waiting. Jim is so much more fun, and oh, that thing Jim did with his tongue when Jerry was away last weekend." He stopped abruptly, his face flushing red. Wait, there's more. And it's not just Jim. Jan's stomach dropped to her feet. Oh no. Something told her this was far worse than the single transgression she had mentally buried decades ago. Vague memories surfaced. Scribbling fantasies in that diary. Some real experiences. Others exaggerated. She'd been young, insecure, foolish. At the time, writing it all down had been some bizarre kind of thrill. "Jerry," she began, forcing a lightness she absolutely didn't feel. "This happened so long ago. Why does it even—" "Stop talking," he shouted, the veins in his neck bulging. "I'm not finished." With shaking hands, he rifled through the pages, reading random paragraphs in a barely controlled voice. "I can't stop thinking about the way Greg pinned me against the wall last night, how his fingers felt against my skin. Jerry's away again and I'm so lonely. Maybe I'll let Greg come over this weekend too." He flipped more pages, his voice getting more strained. "Wow, I never thought I'd be the type to be with more than one man in a single day, but here I am. First with Eddie in the morning, then meeting up with Matt in the evening. The rush is indescribable. I sometimes wonder if I'm doing the right thing. But I'm not hurting anyone, right? Jerry doesn't need to know. I'm sure once we're married, I'll settle down." Each new excerpt was like a dagger twisting deeper into Jerry's heart. Jan pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. She'd forgotten these diaries contained far more than just the fling with Jim. She'd chronicled a whole series of indiscretions, stolen kisses, full-blown affairs with multiple men, explicit fantasies she'd somehow convinced herself were harmless. "Jerry," she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "That was 30 years ago. None of it matters anymore." He glared at her, then slammed the diary shut. "Matters? You think reading about how my own wife bragged about hooking up with one guy after another doesn't matter?" She took a step back, fear morphing into defensive arrogance. She couldn't let him see her at her weakest. "I'm not that person anymore. I was young and dumb." "Were you?" he snapped. "Because you wrote in here about things you did while we were already engaged?" "Oh, come on, Jerry," she scoffed, crossing her arms. "Stop acting like this is some fresh betrayal. It's older than our entire marriage. I haven't seen those men in decades." "I had the right to know what I was marrying into," he roared, his voice echoing off the basement walls. "Instead, I was duped into thinking you were just nervous about me leaving for college. Meanwhile, you were hooking up with guys the moment I turned my back." "It was only a few times," she hissed, but as the words left her lips, she remembered. It was more than a few times. A lot more. Jerry fixed her with a stare that froze her on the spot. "You said a few times? Try reading your own words, Jan." There are pages about you meeting guy after guy, like some out-of-control, self-destructive spree, and the details? He looked physically ill. I can't believe this. Jan's face hardened. Look, it's done. You can't change the past. His laugh was hollow and bitter. Oh, that's your defense? That it doesn't count because it was a long time ago? She shrugged, mustering a dismissive attitude. Deep down, panic roiled in her gut, but she was determined not to show it. People do stupid things in their 20s. Move on. Jerry opened another box, rummaging through old photos. And you kept these, too. I'm starting to wonder if you enjoy remembering every filthy detail. She recognized the box he'd found. Old Polaroids and mementos she should have destroyed years ago. He pulled out a photograph, and Jan's heart nearly stopped. Who? Jerry said slowly. Are these men? His eyes flicked between the picture and his wife. The photo showed Jan on a couch, half-dressed in a tight top, leaning into a group of 5 guys. Each one had a cocky grin and an arm slung around her. One was flexing an impressive bicep. Another was making a crude gesture toward her backside. But the worst part was Jan's own expression. She looked thrilled. To top it off, scrawled across the bottom in black marker were the words, "The best night ever." She tried to brush it off. Oh, please, Jerry. That's from some random party. It's nothing. But there was no denying the suggestive nature of the photo. The men had a certain familiar closeness with her, and Jan's hair was rumpled in a way that suggested a very wild night. Jerry's eyes glistened with tears he refused to shed. Why did you save this? His voice was hushed, teetering between heartbreak and fury. Why would you hold on to any memory of that kind of violation of our trust? She shrugged again, though it came off as a weak, twitchy gesture. I forgot I even had it. He let the photo fall from his hand like it burned his fingers. Get out. Jerry stared her down. I said get out. Jan stormed upstairs, tears in her eyes, but her face twisted into a rebellious scowl. This is so stupid, she muttered to herself. It was insane that after so many good years, Jerry was going to throw it all away because of some ancient history. Why did he have to go snooping around in the basement anyway? Jerry emerged moments later, carrying the open diary and a handful of photographs. You're going to your parents, he said flatly. His calmness was more terrifying than the yelling had been. You can't just banish me. I live here too. Not anymore. Not until I figure out what to do with all of this. He gestured to the diary. Do you realize how humiliating this is? For 30 years, I've believed in a marriage that might have been a lie from day one. She rolled her eyes. My God, Jerry, if it was a lie, then why did we have such a good life? He trembled, each breath ragged. Was it a good life, though, Jan? Or did you just get bored with cheating and decide I was the safe bet? This is exactly what I'm talking about, she snapped. You're blowing everything out of proportion. So I had a wild streak when I was younger. Big deal, people change. Jerry's lips thinned into a hard line. Pack your things, or I'll pack them for you. Jan wanted to keep arguing, but one look in his eyes told her he was dead serious. She reluctantly turned and headed to their bedroom. While shoving clothes into a suitcase, she heard him pacing outside the door. Just before she zipped up her bag, she spotted a family photo on the nightstand. Jerry, their daughter Sarah, their son Michael, and her. She remembered the day it was taken. They were all laughing, wearing matching Christmas sweaters, looking so perfect. She took the photo in her hand, closed her eyes, and whispered, He'll calm down. He has to. Out in the driveway, Jerry stood at the front door with an expression like granite. She hauled her suitcase to the car, head held high. Before she got in, she glared at him. This is ridiculous, and you'll regret it. He swallowed but didn't respond. As she drove off, she looked in the rearview mirror to see him standing there, the diary still clutched in his hand. She hated him in that moment almost as much as she hated herself. Word spreads fast in a small town. By the time Jan reached her parents' house, her phone was blowing up with messages from friends. He's telling everyone at Murphy's bar what he read one text from her close friend Linda. Are you okay? Jan cursed under her breath. So, Jerry wasn't just wounded. He was airing their dirty laundry in public. He was humiliating her. She shoved her phone away. She'd deal with that later. Her parents were both in their 80s, and they adored Jerry like a son. They looked shocked and a little pale as Jan explained through gritted teeth that Jerry had found some old diaries. She didn't go into specifics, just said that he was overreacting to some affairs I had before we were married. But sweetheart, her mother said, confusion evident in her voice. If it was before you were married, Why is he so angry? It's complicated, Jan muttered, not wanting to reveal the part about multiple men, or that some of it might have overlapped with their engagement. She also skipped mentioning the explicit photo with 5 men. She could only imagine her father's face if he heard that. Meanwhile, Jerry was on a video call with both their adult children, telling them everything. Everything. Within hours, Jan's daughter was blowing up her phone. "How could you do that to Dad?" Sarah demanded, her voice shaking with anger and confusion. "Cheating on him with who knows how many men? That's disgusting," Jan bristled, an indignant flush rising to her cheeks. "Watch your tone with me, young lady." "Oh, so now you're going to be the stern mother? You can't hide behind mom mode anymore, not after what you did. Dad showed us those diary pages. He literally scanned them. You wrote about hooking up with 5 men in the same week while you were engaged to him." Jan's hand tightened around her phone. It's out of context. And it was decades ago. Her daughter's breath hissed through the line. "You lied to him. You lied to us. God, Mom, I always looked up to you. I can't believe I'm saying this, but right now I'm disgusted." Then the line went dead. A few days later, Jan tried to salvage the relationship with her kids, especially with Sarah, who was still barely speaking to her. But then the final bombshell dropped. One afternoon, Sarah called, her voice eerily calm. Too calm. "Mom," she said, "I sent off for a DNA test." Jan froze, the memory of those diaries flashing through her mind. She remembered writing about hooking up with multiple men around the same time she and Jerry had gotten engaged. She remembered that timeline being precariously close to Sarah's conception. But she'd always told herself it must be Jerry's child. Why else would she never mention it to him? "What are you talking about?" Jan asked, her throat dry. "A simple DNA test. I've been wanting to do it for a while for genealogical reasons. But you know what else it shows, right?" Jan bit her lip. "Honey, you're being irrational. Those at-home tests aren't even that accurate." Sarah's voice hardened. "They're accurate enough. Besides, Dad agreed to do it too. We'll see if it matches." Jan closed her eyes, her world spinning. "All right," she said, barely above a whisper. "You go ahead and do that." The wait for results felt like an eternity, and each day was more agonizing than the last. Jan prayed she was just being paranoid, that Jerry was indeed the biological father, because if he wasn't, the results came one afternoon while Jan was still at her parents' house. She felt her phone vibrate, saw Sarah's name, and answered. "Mom," came the shaking voice on the other end. "It says, I'm not Dad's daughter." Jan's heart shattered. For a moment, she couldn't speak. She felt faint. "Oh my God, it's true. How could you, Mom?" Sarah's voice was high-pitched, on the verge of hysteria. "My entire life is a lie. Dad is not my dad. All this time. Did you know?" Jan let out a choked sob. I suspected, but I wasn't sure. I thought I might just be overthinking. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She could hear Sarah crying. "Dad's packing up his things. He's moving. I don't even know where. He's telling me he can't stay here in this town anymore. He wants to relocate near his parents in Florida or something. You have to fix this? How am I supposed to fix something like this?" Jan cried, feeling dizzy. "Your father is..." "Everything you know about him is real. He loves you. But he's not my biological father. This changes everything." And then the line went dead again. Jan drove back to the house she once shared with Jerry. She felt defiant, humiliated, terrified, the perfect swirl of raw emotions. When she walked in, she found Jerry standing in the living room, his eyes red from anger or tears or both. "You have some nerve," he said quietly, "showing up here." She tossed her hair back, a defensive posture. "I need my things." His bitter laugh echoed through the emptiness. "Yeah, well, you might want to take all your things because I'm moving." "Officially," she froze. "What about us?" "There is no us, Jan. You lied. You cheated before we got married. You carried on like, I don't even want to say it out loud. And now we learn our daughter isn't even biologically mine." A swirl of conflicting emotions twisted in Jan's stomach. She wanted to push back, to say it was all so long ago that it shouldn't count. But the DNA test had just destroyed the last crumb of Jerry's illusions. "Jerry," she managed, swallowing hard, "I was young. I didn't know who the father was. I loved you, and I still do. That's why I married you instead of running off with those other guys. Besides, you raised our daughter. That counts for something." His eyes flared with anger. "Counts for something? Jesus, Jan. You let me believe she was mine." We read stories every night. I taught her how to ride a bike. I paid her college tuition. And you didn't have the decency to tell me there was even a chance I wasn't her father." She took a step toward him, arms outstretched. "I was protecting you and her. She sees you as her dad." Jerry shook his head. "Protecting me?" he echoed, bitterness dripping from each syllable. "That's rich. Do you realize how messed up that is, Jan? You decided on my behalf that I shouldn't know she might not be mine. Congratulations. You played God with my life." She tried to touch him, but he recoiled. "Don't," he said. "Don't even try. The only reason you came back here was probably to search for pity or to salvage your reputation." His eyes flicked over her with contempt. "Arrogant, selfish. That's what you are." Her anger flared. "Oh, I'm arrogant? You're the one telling the whole town about this. Humiliating me." "Good," he snapped, his voice rising. "You deserve humiliation for the lies you told, for turning our life into a joke." Jan clenched her fists. "Well, guess what, Jerry? You're not exactly a saint here, airing our dirty laundry all over town. You think you're so high and mighty?" He looked like he might explode, but then he forced himself to exhale. With surprising calm, he said, "Leave, now." She hesitated, but he pointed to the door. "Leave, or so help me, I'll call the cops and say you're trespassing." Her mouth twitched. She knew he wasn't bluffing. Though she wanted to stay, to keep fighting, she turned on her heel and walked out, slamming the door behind her. As soon as she got in her car, she broke down sobbing. "Why are you crying?" she asked herself. "You did this." "You're right. You did all of it." In a town of only 3,600 people, Jan's scandal was the talk of every diner, grocery store, and coffee shop. People whispered when she went to pick up groceries for her parents. Some gave her pitying looks, others gave disapproving glares. She tried to ignore the murmurs. "Did you hear about Jan? Turns out her daughter isn't Jerry's. I heard she was hooking up with 5 guys at once back in the day. Supposedly, there's a photo so scandalous my friend's friend saw it, and on and on. One day, she overheard a pair of women in the cereal aisle discussing how Jerry was definitely leaving for Florida, and that Jan was getting what she deserved. She couldn't take it anymore. She abandoned her cart and fled. In the parking lot, her phone buzzed. It was her mother, frantic. "Jan, get back here. Jerry's on the phone. He wants to talk to you." She rushed home, heart pounding. Was it possible Jerry had calmed down enough to speak rationally? When she walked into her parents' living room, she found Jerry on speakerphone, the tension in the air thick as storm clouds. Jan's mother hovered by the phone, wringing her hands. "Jan," Jerry's voice came through, sounding exhausted. "I need a favor." She couldn't believe her ears. "A favor?" He sighed. "Yes, I've had enough. I'm leaving for Florida next week. I need you to sign some papers so we can move forward with a separation." Her stomach twisted. "A separation?" "Jerry, don't do this. Sign them," he said, ignoring her plea. "Or I'll file for divorce without any negotiation, and you'll get nothing." Her parents exchanged horrified glances. Jan pressed her palms to her temples, frustration boiling over. "So that's how you're going to play it? You leave me high and dry after 3 decades of marriage?" He gave a short bark of a laugh. "Actually, you left me high and dry the moment you decided it was fine to cheat on me all those years ago and lie about it. So sign the papers, or I'll do this the hard way." Jan bit back a retort, tears burning at the back of her eyes. "Fine. Send them over." A few weeks passed with minimal contact between them. Jan retreated deeper into a bitter gloom, ignoring phone calls from nosy acquaintances. She also heard from a reliable source that Jerry had been seen out with none other than Susie, the ex-wife of Jim, the electrician from her diaries. That rumor made her seethe with jealousy and anger. How dare they? "He's doing exactly what I did," she muttered, pacing her bedroom at her parents' house. "Only difference is he's flaunting it. He wants me to suffer." In truth, Jerry had every right to see whomever he wanted, but the thought of him getting close to Susie, bonding over the mutual heartbreak caused by Jan and Jim, tore Jan up inside. It felt like a cosmic twist of the knife. Her phone vibrated, a message from an unknown number. "You reap what you sow." "Susie." Jan stared at the text, her blood boiling. "I'm not going to engage," she told herself, even as she felt the urge to hurl her phone against the wall. But she typed out a reply anyway. "Leave me alone. You have no business in my marriage." A minute later, the response came. "It's not your marriage anymore, sweetie. He deserves better. Jan hissed in fury but forced herself to stop responding. They can have each other, she thought, though her heart panged with regret. I never realized how quickly everything could crumble. On a cold Sunday morning, Jan decided to return to her house. She still saw it that way, and faced Jerry one last time before he officially moved to Florida. She wanted to at least attempt closure, maybe beg him to keep the lines of communication open. She also harbored a tiny flicker of hope that he might realize their bond was stronger than these ancient mistakes. The driveway was half full of moving boxes. Jerry was supervising a friend who was helping him load them into a rental truck. As soon as he spotted Jan's car, his expression hardened. "Why are you here?" he said, walking up to her before she'd even shut her car door. The wind whipped at his hair, revealing deeper lines on his face. Lines of stress, heartbreak, maybe hate. She stepped out, ignoring the curious stare of Jerry's friend. "We need to talk. Alone." Jerry stiffened, then nodded curtly. Inside. They entered the living room, which looked so bare with all the furniture gone. Cardboard boxes lined the walls. The couch they'd cuddled on for years was already shoved into the moving truck. He crossed his arms. "Say what you need to say," she swallowed. "Jerry, please, I know I messed up, okay? And I'm sorry. But we've had 3 decades, 30 years of marriage. That should count for something. I made stupid, horrible choices when I was younger, but I've been faithful ever since. You know that." He snorted. "Actually, I don't know that, considering how well you hid this side of yourself." She took a step closer, ignoring his derisive tone. "Look, let's be honest. Our daughter might not be your biological child, but you're the only father she's ever known. She loves you, and so do I." A muscle in Jerry's jaw twitched. "Yeah, well, you should have thought about that before lying to me for 3 decades. Jan's voice hitched. "It was a mistake. I'm not the same person I was back then. Don't throw away everything we built." Jerry stared at her for a long moment, then shook his head slowly. "You know, a few months ago I might have listened to you, but after reading those diaries, they're old," she interjected, tears brimming. "Stop acting like I cheated on you yesterday," he raised his voice. "Doesn't matter if it was 30 years or 30 seconds. You let me believe I was marrying someone pure, loyal, honest. All that time you had this skeleton in your closet. Or should I say, a horde of skeletons. Greg, Eddie, and God knows who else. And that photo with the 5 men? I can't unsee that." Her face twisted in shame for a split second, but she quickly hardened. "You're unbelievable. I can't change the past, Jerry." "Exactly," he replied, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "And I can't change how I feel." Jan's bravado cracked, tears spilling down her cheeks. "So that's it? You're leaving me?" He nodded. "We're already divorced in every way that matters. The legal process will catch up soon enough. I have no reason to stay in this house, this town, this state. I'm done." She clasped her hands together. "Please, let's at least talk about therapy. Maybe we can—" "No," he said, finality lacing the single word. "I won't live my life wondering if you've done it again. I can't look at you without picturing them." Jan's shoulders slumped, defeat washing over her. "So you'd rather run off with Susie or whoever else you've been seeing?" Jerry raised a brow. "At least Susie isn't hiding any diaries full of secrets, but that's irrelevant to you. We're finished, Jan." She felt a flash of rage. "You're a hypocrite if you're hooking up with her, you know that? If you can't forgive me for my past." He cut her off with a bitter laugh. "My God, you still don't get it. This isn't about me hooking up with anyone. It's about your fundamental betrayal, your arrogance, and the lies that form the foundation of our entire marriage. If you can't see the difference, then there's truly nothing left to say." They stood in silence for a moment, tension crackling like static in the air. Then Jerry's friend poked his head through the front door. "Hey man, sorry to interrupt, but the truck's packed. We should get going soon." Jerry nodded. "Right." Jan stared at him, her eyes pleading, but he turned away, grabbed his coat from the floor, and walked out without another word. Days turned into weeks. Jerry left for Florida. Sarah moved to Orlando for work. Michael stayed in Atlanta. Jan was alone in her parents' house, the same small bedroom she'd grown up in, but now haunted by regrets and the ghost of what used to be. She spent her nights scrolling through old photos on her phone, pausing on each image of her and Jerry smiling at barbecues, birthdays, anniversaries. She thought about that fateful day in the basement. If only she had destroyed those diaries. If only she had never written them in the first place. But regrets were useless now. Her phone rang sporadically, mostly from old friends wanting the inside scoop on the scandal. She ignored them. She ignored everyone because no matter how many times she tried to justify or rationalize, the truth was inescapable. She had caused this. Once, late at night, she even thought about driving down to Florida unannounced, knocking on Jerry's door and begging him again. But she knew it would only worsen the humiliation. The man she had loved, the one who raised a daughter he thought was his own, was gone. Physically, emotionally, everything. She had lost him and possibly lost herself, too. In a fleeting moment of desperation, she texted Sarah, "I'm so sorry, honey. I love you. I hope someday you can forgive me. Let me know how your new apartment is going." No response. She tried Michael next, leaving a tearful voicemail. "Please call me back. I know you're hurting, but I'm hurting too. I love you both more than anything." Nothing. The silence was deafening. One chilly evening, Jan's father found her sitting in the dark living room, staring at nothing. He cleared his throat. "Jan," he began softly, "I know this is a difficult time, but maybe you should talk to your kids in person." She nodded, tears pooling. "They won't pick up my calls. I'm a complete pariah now." Her father sighed and placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "You have to understand why they're upset, especially Sarah. Her sense of identity is shattered." Jan bit her lip. "I know, and it's all my fault. If only I'd told Jerry the truth." "Maybe we could have." She shook her head, too exhausted to finish the thought. Her father looked at her, sorrow etched in every wrinkle of his face. "You might have lost Jerry," he said quietly, "but do what you can to not lose your children. If that means letting them be angry for a while, you let them. If it means apologizing 1,000,000 times, you do it. Don't let your pride or your resentment get in the way." Jan nodded, burying her face in her hands. "I don't know if they'll ever forgive me." He squeezed her shoulder. "Maybe not, but that doesn't mean you stop trying." Months passed, and Jan found a small part-time job at a boutique in town, mostly to keep herself from going stir-crazy. She lived with her parents, cooking meals for them, cleaning, distracting herself from the emptiness that lurked in her heart. Jerry was gone, somewhere near Tampa, building a new life. The last she heard, he was renting a small house by the water. Rumors swirled that he was still in touch with Susie. Some said they were just friends, others said they were lovers. Jan tried not to care, but the thought of him moving on so easily gnawed at her soul. Her kids remained distant. The only semblance of contact was the occasional text from Sarah, curt and practical, about paperwork or tax documents. Michael never replied at all. Some nights, Jan lay awake, replaying every moment of her past. She thought about that group photo with 5 guys, the time she bragged in her diary about hooking up with men while Jerry was away, the day she discovered she was pregnant but never truly considered the timeline. It was all so easy to dismiss back then, to say, it's the past and move on. But now she understood that some pasts, no matter how far behind, never truly go away. They linger in boxes and diaries and old photos hidden in a basement, silent landmines waiting to detonate a lifetime later. 6 months after Jerry left, Jan was working her usual shift at the boutique when Linda burst through the door, her face flushed with excitement and something else, malicious glee. "Jan, you need to see this," Linda said, thrusting her phone forward. On the screen was a Facebook post from Susie, showing her and Jerry at what looked like a beach restaurant. They were both smiling, Jerry's arm around her shoulders. The caption read, "Sometimes life gives you a second chance at happiness. So grateful for this amazing man who knows what loyalty means. #new beginnings, #true partnership." Jan felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. "Turn that off." "Wait, there's more," Linda said, scrolling. "Look at the comments." Jan saw dozens of responses from people she knew, neighbors, acquaintances, even some of her former friends. "You both deserve happiness after what you've been through. Jerry's such a good man. So glad he found someone who appreciates him. Some people don't know what they have until it's gone, their loss. This is beautiful. Real love after fake relationships." Jan's hands shook as she grabbed the phone from Linda. "Stop it. Just stop." "I thought you should know what people are saying," Linda said, but there was a cruel satisfaction in her voice that made Jan realize this wasn't about friendship. It was about gossip, drama, being the messenger of someone else's downfall. "Get out," Jan said quietly. "What?" "Get out of my store, now." Linda's eyes widened. Jan, you were just trying to hurt me more than I'm already hurt. I see right through you, Linda. You've been loving every second of this disaster, haven't you? Finally, perfect Jan gets what's coming to her. Linda's face reddened. You did bring this on yourself. Maybe I did, Jan said, her voice rising. But at least I'm not a vulture feeding off other people's misery. At least I never pretended to be someone's friend while secretly hoping they'd fail. You're being ridiculous. Am I? Tell me, Linda, how many people have you told about my private business? How many times have you repeated the juiciest details about my diary entries? How many laughs have you gotten at my expense? Linda shifted uncomfortably. People talk, Jan. It's not my fault. People like you make them talk, Jan shouted. People like you turn someone's worst moment into entertainment. You know what? I may have screwed up my marriage 30 years ago, but you're screwing up your soul right now. I don't have to listen to this, Linda said, turning toward the door. No, you don't, Jan called after her. But maybe you should listen to yourself sometime. See how ugly you sound when you're gossiping about people who used to trust you. After Linda left, Jan sat in the empty boutique, staring at the clothes racks, feeling more alone than ever. She just lost another friend, but maybe Linda had never really been a friend at all. Maybe she'd just been waiting for Jan to fall so she could watch it happen. That evening, Jan made a decision that surprised even herself. She was going to fight back. Not for her marriage, that was clearly over, but for her relationship with her children. And if that meant confronting some uncomfortable truths and facing people head on, so be it. She started with a Facebook post of her own. It was the first thing she'd posted in months. I know there's been a lot of talk about my personal life lately, some of it true, some of it exaggerated, all of it painful. I made serious mistakes 30 years ago, mistakes that have destroyed my marriage and hurt my family. I'm not asking for forgiveness or sympathy. I'm asking for the gossip to stop. My children don't deserve to have their mother's failures dissected in public. Whatever you think of me, please consider them. The post got 17 comments within an hour. Most were supportive, but a few were brutal. Maybe you should have thought about your kids before you wrote those things. Actions have consequences. Don't blame others for talking about what you did. Too little, too late. But buried in the harsh responses was one that made her heart skip. Mom, I saw your post. Can we talk? Sarah, Jan called immediately, her hands trembling as she dialed. Hi. Sarah's voice was cautious, guarded. Hi, sweetheart. Thank you for reaching out. There was a long pause. I've been thinking a lot about everything. About what happened, about Dad, about who I am now. Jan's throat tightened. You're still you, honey. You're still my daughter, and you're still the same person Dad raised and loved. But I'm not his biological daughter. Sarah's voice cracked. Do you know how that feels? To find out at 28 that everything you believed about your identity was wrong? I can't imagine, Jan whispered. But I can tell you that Jerry, your dad, he loved you from the moment you were born. He was there for your first steps, your first words, every scraped knee, every heartbreak. DNA doesn't change that. Then why didn't you tell him? Why did you let him live a lie? Jan closed her eyes. Because I was scared. Because I convinced myself it didn't matter. Because I was young and selfish and thought I could bury the past forever. There's no excuse for it, Sarah. None. Another long pause. I've been seeing a therapist. That's good. That's really good. She says that sometimes the people we love make choices that hurt us, and we have to decide whether the love is stronger than the hurt. Jan's heart raced. What did you decide? I don't know yet, but I know I miss my mom, even if my mom made terrible choices. Tears streamed down Jan's face. I miss you too, so much. I'm not ready to see you yet, Sarah said quickly, but maybe we can talk sometimes, on the phone. I would love that, Jan said. I would love that so much. After they hung up, Jan felt a tiny spark of hope for the first time in months. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a crack in the wall. Maybe, with time, she could rebuild at least some of what she'd destroyed. 2 weeks later, Jan was closing up the boutique when she saw a familiar figure through the window. Greg Paulson, one of the men from her diary entries, was standing on the sidewalk, apparently waiting for her. Her stomach lurched. Greg had aged. His hair was graying, his face more lined, but she recognized him immediately. He'd been one of her more frequent companions during that wild period 30 years ago. She considered staying inside until he left, but he'd clearly seen her. Taking a deep breath, she unlocked the door. "Greg," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "What are you doing here?" He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "Hey, Jan. Heard you've been having some trouble lately." "What do you want?" "Just wanted to catch up with an old friend. Heard Jerry found your diary. Must have been quite a shock for him." Jan felt her defenses rising. "That's none of your business, isn't it?" Greg stepped closer. "I mean, I'm mentioned in there quite a bit, aren't I? All those detailed descriptions of our encounters. That was 30 years ago, Greg. We were different people. Were we?" His smile turned carnivory. "Because I remember you being pretty wild back then, very adventurous. And from what I hear, poor Jerry had no idea what he was really getting." Jan's anger flared. "Get to the point. What do you want?" "Well, since you're newly single and all, I thought maybe we could reconnect, for old time's sake." The audacity of it made her speechless for a moment. "Oh, you can't be serious." "Why not? We had some good times, didn't we? And now you don't have to sneak around anymore?" "I'm not the same person I was then," Jan said firmly. "And even if I were, I wouldn't be interested in someone who shows up to kick me when I'm down." Greg's expression darkened. "Don't get all high and mighty with me, Jan. I know who you really are. I've seen it. Yes, you saw who I was 30 years ago when I was young and stupid and making terrible decisions. But that's not who I am now." "People don't really change," Greg said with a sneer. "They just get better at hiding who they are. But sometimes the truth comes out, doesn't it? Sometimes people find old diaries." "Get away from me," Jan said, backing toward her car. "Come on, Jan. Don't be like that. I remember how much you used to enjoy." "I said, get away from me?" Jan's voice rose, and she noticed a few people on the street turning to look. Greg raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. But when you get lonely, when you realize what you've lost and what you're not going to get back, remember that some of us knew the real you. And we're still here." He walked away, leaving John shaking by her car. The encounter had rattled her more than she wanted to admit, not because she had any interest in Greg, but because his words hit too close to home. Was this who she really was? Was the person she'd become over the past 30 years just an act? That night, she called Sarah again. "Mom, is everything okay? You sound upset." Jan hesitated, then decided to be honest. "I ran into someone today. Someone from that time. He said some things that made me question whether I've really changed at all." "What kind of things?" "He basically said that people don't really change. They just hide who they are. That the person I was 30 years ago is my true self." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "Do you believe that?" "I don't know. Sometimes I look back at those diaries, at the things I wrote, the choices I made, and I wonder if there's something fundamentally wrong with me. Something that makes me capable of hurting the people I love." "Mom," Sarah said gently, "I've been thinking about this a lot in therapy, about whether people can change, whether our past defines us. And I think you have changed. The mom who raised me, who read me bedtime stories and helped me with homework and worried about me when I was out too late, that person was real. She wasn't fake just because she had a different past." Jan felt tears welling up. You really think so?" "I think you made terrible choices when you were young. I think you were selfish and reckless, and you hurt Dad in ways that can't be undone. But I also think you spent 30 years being a good wife and mother. Both things can be true. Your dad doesn't see it that way." "No, he doesn't, and I understand why. What you did, it would be hard for anyone to get past. But that doesn't mean you're irredeemable." After they hung up, Jan sat in her childhood bedroom, looking at old family photos. Sarah was right. Both things could be true. She'd been reckless and selfish at 22. She had also been a devoted mother and wife for 3 decades. The question was, which version of herself would she be going forward? The next morning, Jan made another decision. She was going to face her past head-on, starting with the people who had been there. She drove to Jim's electrical shop. He was alone, working on some wiring in the back. When he saw her, his expression became guarded. "Jan, heard about you and Jerry. Sorry about that." "Are you?" she asked. "Because you seem to be pretty cozy with his new girlfriend." Jim flushed. "Susie and we're divorced, Jan. We have been for 15 years. If we want to support each other through difficult times, that's our business." "Fair enough. But I wanted to ask you something." Do you ever think about that time? About what we did? Jim looked uncomfortable. Sometimes. Not often. Do you regret it? He was quiet for a long moment. I regret that it hurt people. I regret that Susie found out and it contributed to our divorce. I regret that it's causing problems for you now. But do you regret the actual relationship we had? Jim met her eyes. No, we were both adults. We both made choices. But I do regret that we made those choices while we were supposed to be committed to other people. Jan nodded. I've been wondering if I'm a fundamentally bad person, if the things I did back then define who I really am. I don't think anyone is fundamentally anything, Jim said thoughtfully. I think we all have the capacity for good and bad, and we make choices every day about which one we're going to feed. So you think people can change? I think people can choose to be different. Whether that's the same as changing, I don't know. Jan left the shop feeling slightly better. Jim wasn't trying to reconnect or exploit her situation. He was just a middle-aged man who'd also made some questionable choices and was trying to live with them. Her next stop was more difficult. She drove to the address she'd found for Eddie Martinez, another name from her diary. Eddie had moved away years ago, but recently returned to care for his aging mother. She found him in his front yard, raking leaves. He looked up when she approached, and his face went through a series of expressions. Surprise, recognition, discomfort. Jan Walsh, well, I'll be damned. Hi, Eddie. Heard about your troubles. Small town, big mouths. She nodded. I wanted to talk to you about back then. Eddie leaned on his rake. What about back then? Did you know I was engaged when we were together? He was quiet for a moment. I knew you were seeing someone seriously. I didn't ask for details. Why not? Because I didn't want to know. Because if I knew, I'd have to make a choice about whether to continue. And I was having too much fun to want to make that choice. His honesty surprised her. So you knew it was wrong? I knew it was complicated. I told myself that what you did with your relationship wasn't my responsibility. That was probably selfish of me. Do you think I'm a bad person? Eddie studied her face. I think you were a young woman who was confused about what she wanted. I think you were probably scared of committing to Jerry and acted out instead of dealing with those feelings. I don't think that makes you evil, but I don't think it makes you innocent either. I destroyed my marriage, my family. Yeah, you did. But you also built that marriage and family in the first place. People are complicated, Jan. We're not all good or all bad. As she drove home, Jan reflected on the conversations she'd had. Jim and Eddie had both been honest with her, neither condemning nor absolving her. They'd owned their parts in what happened without making excuses. Maybe that was what she needed to do too. Own her choices without making excuses, but also without defining her entire existence by her worst moments. That evening, her phone rang. It was Michael, her son, calling for the first time since the scandal broke. Mom, his voice was stiff, formal. Michael, oh honey, I'm so glad you called. I'm calling because Sarah said I should. She said you two have been talking. We have. Just a little. I know you're angry with me. I'm not angry, Mom. I'm disappointed. And confused. Confused about what? About how the mother who taught me about honesty and integrity could have built her marriage on lies. The words hit like a physical blow. Michael, let me finish. I've been thinking about this for months. About whether the mom I knew was real or fake. About whether everything you taught me about being a good person was hypocritical. Jan's heart sank. And what did you decide? I decided that people are complicated. That you can teach your children good values even if you haven't always lived up to them yourself. That maybe making mistakes, even big ones, doesn't automatically make you a bad person. But I also decided that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences last a lifetime. You lost Dad. You almost lost me and Sarah. You lost the respect of a lot of people in this town. Those are the consequences of your choices. I know that, Jan whispered. The question is, what are you going to do with the rest of your life? Are you going to spend it making excuses and feeling sorry for yourself? Or are you going to try to be better? I'm trying to be better. Good, because that's the only way any of this gets better. After Michael hung up, Jan sat in the darkness of her childhood bedroom, thinking about his words. What was she going to do with the rest of her life? She made a list. 1. Continue rebuilding her relationship with her children, too. Stop making excuses for her past behavior. 3. Stop wallowing in self-pity. 4. Find a way to contribute something positive to the world. The last item seemed the most challenging. How do you contribute something positive when you're known as the woman who destroyed her family with decades-old lies? 3 days later, Jan got her answer in an unexpected way. She was working at the boutique when a young woman came in, clearly distraught. She was probably in her early 20s, with red-rimmed eyes and shaking hands. "Can I help you?" Jan asked gently. The woman looked around nervously. "I'm sorry, I needed somewhere to think. My boyfriend, I found out he's been cheating on me, with multiple women. I don't know what to do." Something in the woman's desperation reminded Jan of herself at that age. Lost, confused, making decisions that would have far-reaching consequences. "I'm sorry," Jan said. "That must be incredibly painful." "The thing is," the woman continued, "I've been cheating too. Not a lot, just when he's out of town, I sometimes go out with other guys. Nothing serious, just kissing mostly, but still. And now I'm wondering if I should tell him, or if that would just make everything worse." Jan felt like she was looking at her younger self. "What's your name?" "Amy." "Amy, can I tell you something? Something I learned the hard way?" Amy nodded. "Secrets don't stay buried forever, and when they come out, and they usually do, they hurt so much more than if you'd told the truth from the beginning. But if I tell him, he'll leave me. Maybe. But if you don't tell him, and he finds out later, he'll definitely leave you, and he'll never trust you again, ever." Amy's eyes filled with tears. "So you think I should tell him? I think you should ask yourself why you've been cheating. Are you happy in this relationship? Do you really want to be with him? Because if you don't, then you're wasting both of your time." "I don't know. I thought I loved him, but then why would I?" "Because sometimes we act out when we're scared or confused, or not ready for the commitment we think we want. And that's okay, as long as you're honest about it." Amy wiped her eyes. "Have you ever been in this situation?" Jan was quiet for a moment. "Yes, and I made the wrong choice. I kept the secret. I married him anyway, and 30 years later, when he found out, it destroyed everything." "Oh my God, really? Really? So learn from my mistake, Amy, be honest. With him and with yourself. If you're not ready to be faithful to one person, don't promise to be faithful to one person. There's nothing wrong with being single and figuring out what you want." Amy left a few minutes later, thanking Jan profusely. Jan didn't know if the young woman would take her advice, but she hoped so. That evening, Jan realized she'd found her answer to Michael's question. She could spend the rest of her life helping other people avoid the mistakes she'd made. She could be honest about her failures in a way that might prevent others from failing in the same way. She started small, a blog post about the importance of honesty in relationships, then another about dealing with the consequences of past mistakes. Slowly, people began reaching out to her. Women who'd cheated and didn't know how to come clean. Men who'd discovered infidelities and didn't know how to cope. People struggling with the gap between who they thought they were and who their actions suggested they actually were. Jan wasn't a therapist or a counselor, but she was someone who'd lived through the worst-case scenario and survived. And sometimes, that was exactly what people needed to hear. 6 months later, Sarah came to visit. It was the first time Jan had seen her daughter since the scandal broke, and they both cried when they hugged. "I've been reading your blog," Sarah said over coffee at Jan's parents' kitchen table. "What do you think?" "I think you're helping people. I think you're taking something terrible and finding a way to make it useful." "I'll never get your father back," Jan said. "I know that." "No, you won't. But maybe that's not the point anymore. Maybe the point is what you do next." Jan nodded. "I heard he's engaged to Susie." Sarah's expression was sad but not surprised. "He is. He seems happy." "Good," Jan said, and was surprised to find she mostly meant it. "He deserves to be happy." "So do you, Mom." "Different kind of happy, maybe, but still." That afternoon, Sarah helped Jan pack up the last of her things from her childhood bedroom. She was moving into a small apartment above the boutique. Not much, but it was hers. As they folded clothes and sorted through old papers, Sarah found something that made her pause. "Mom, what's this?" She was holding a letter, handwritten on hotel stationery. Jan looked at it and felt her stomach drop. "I don't know. Where did you find it?" "It was tucked in the back of this photo album." Jan took the letter with trembling hands. It was addressed to her, dated just 2 weeks after she and Jerry had gotten engaged 30 years ago. The return address was from a hotel in the city where she'd gone for a weekend with her friends. the weekend she'd written about in such detail in her diary. She opened it slowly, already knowing what she'd find. "Dear Jan," the letter began, "I know our weekend together was just supposed to be fun, but I can't stop thinking about you. I know you're engaged, but I have to ask, are you sure you're ready for that? Because if you're not, I'd love to see you again. What we had was special. You have my number. Matt." Jan's hands shook as she read. This was worse than the diary entries. This was proof that not only had she cheated, but that the men had wanted more. That she could have left Jerry for one of them if she'd chosen to. "Mom?" Sarah's voice was concerned. "What is it?" Jan handed her the letter without a word. Sarah read it, her expression growing more troubled with each line. "You never saw this before?" Sarah asked. "No, it must have gotten mixed in with other mail and I forgot about it." They sat in silence for a moment. "Would you have gone to him?" Sarah asked quietly. "If you'd seen this at the time?" Jan thought about it honestly. "I don't know. Maybe. I was so confused back then, so scared of committing to your father. If I'd seen this, if I'd known Matt wanted something more serious. But you didn't see it." "No, I didn't see it. And you chose Dad." "I did choose Dad. I chose him, and I loved him, and I tried to be a good wife to him." Sarah folded the letter carefully. "I think we should throw this away." "Why?" "Because it doesn't change anything. You made the choice you made. Dad's moved on. And this would just hurt him more if he saw it." Jan watched her daughter tear the letter into small pieces and put them in the trash. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. Sarah was protecting her father from further pain, but she was also protecting her mother from further self-destruction. "Thank you," Jan said. "We all have enough pain to deal with," Sarah replied. "We don't need to go looking for more." As they finished packing, Jan felt something she hadn't felt in almost a year. Peace. Not happiness, not joy, but a quiet acceptance of where she was and where she was going. She had lost her marriage, lost her reputation, lost the life she'd built. But she still had her children. She had work that mattered to her, and she had the possibility of building something new from the ruins of what came before. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was still a life, and maybe, just maybe, it could be a good one. A year later, Jan was invited to speak at a women's conference about relationships and honesty. Standing in front of 300 women, she told her story. The whole story, without excuses or justifications. "I destroyed my marriage," she concluded. "Not because I was evil, but because I was a coward. I was too scared to face my own feelings, too proud to admit my mistakes, and too selfish to consider the long-term consequences of my actions. I can't undo that. But I can share what I learned, in the hope that some of you might make better choices than I did." The response was overwhelming. Women lined up afterward to talk to her, to share their own stories, to ask for advice. Jan realized she'd found her purpose, not to redeem herself because some things can't be redeemed, but to help others avoid the same fate. She never remarried. Jerry and Susie had a small wedding by the beach in Florida, which Sarah attended. Jan heard it was lovely. Michael finished his graduate degree and moved to Seattle for work. He called his mother once a week, every Sunday at 7 p.m. They talked about his job, his girlfriend, the weather, normal things that gradually rebuilt their relationship, one conversation at a time. Sarah moved back home after a year in Orlando, deciding she wanted to be closer to family. She and Jan had dinner every other Thursday, a tradition that started tentatively but grew into something both women cherished. Jan never saw Jerry again after that last day in their empty house. Sometimes she wondered if she should reach out, if she should try to apologize one more time. But she knew it would only cause him more pain, and she'd caused him enough for one lifetime. Instead, she focused on the life she had, not the life she'd lost. She expanded her blog into a book which was published by a small press specializing in personal memoirs. It didn't become a bestseller, but it found its audience, people who needed to know that they could survive their worst mistakes. She still lived in the small apartment above the boutique. It was quiet and clean and hers. On Thursday evenings when Sarah came for dinner, they cooked together and talked about everything except the past. On Sunday evenings when Michael called, they made plans for his next visit home. It wasn't the life Jan had imagined for herself at 65. She'd thought she'd be traveling with Jerry, spoiling grandchildren, celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. Instead, she was alone, building something entirely new from the ashes of what she'd destroyed. But as she sat in her small living room one evening, reading emails from women who'd been helped by her writing, she realized something surprising. She wasn't unhappy. She was different than she'd been. Smaller in some ways, but more honest. She'd lost everything she thought mattered and discovered that she could still build a life worth living. The last entry in her new journal, the one she kept not as a record of secrets but as a practice in truth-telling, read, "Today marks 2 years since Jerry found my old diary. 2 years since my marriage ended, since my children learned who I really was, since my comfortable life exploded. I would give anything to go back and make different choices, to be the person Jerry thought he married from the beginning. But I can't. All I can do is be honest about who I was, who I became, and who I'm choosing to be now. Today, I choose to be someone who helps rather than hurts. Tomorrow, I'll make that choice again. That's all any of us can do. Make better choices, one day at a time, and hope it's enough." She closed the journal and turned off the light. Outside her window, the small town where she'd lived her whole life continued its quiet existence. People were making dinner, helping children with homework, falling in love, making mistakes they'd have to live with for the rest of their lives. Jan had learned that the worst thing about destroying your life isn't that it ends. It's that it continues. You have to wake up every day and figure out how to live with what you've done. But she'd also learned that sometimes, if you're very lucky and willing to do the hard work of facing the truth, you can build something worth having from the wreckage. It wouldn't be the same as what came before. It might not even be as good, but it could still be meaningful. It could still matter. And for Jan, that would have to be enough. The end.